So, trials are now beginning for the woman accused of committing the largest COVID-19 era fraud scheme ever. Over $250 million for her company known as Feeding Our Future. Now, if you don't know what Feeding Our Future is, it's supposed to be a program to feed hungry children during the COVID-19 pandemic. But instead of feeding hungry children, she recruited different restaurants in the Minneapolis area so she could sponsor them and told them to lie about the amount of kids they were feeding so that they can pretty much enrich themselves. So here's the story.
We got new details on the case the U.S. Attorney's Office is building for the upcoming Feeding Our Future trial. We know prosecutors are trying to convince a jury that several companies took federal money meant to feed children during the COVID pandemic and spent it on luxury travel, vehicles, and real estate. We also know this case has interest across the board, with several high-profile political connections wrapped up with it. The U.S. Attorney's Office just laid out their strategy when it comes to this case going to trial, and Lou Raguse is here with the details.
This trial is the main event, so to speak, in the Feeding Our Future case, with the defendants including a former aide to Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, the former owners of Safari Restaurant, considered to be top businessmen in Minneapolis' Somali community, and Amy Bock, the former executive director of the nonprofit Feeding Our Future.
The building off Lake Street in South Minneapolis that housed Safari Restaurant has been painted over and repurposed. But in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the restaurant claimed to serve more than 3.9 million meals to children in a 19-month span, even using Congresswoman Ilhan Omar in a promotional video in an alleged attempt to show legitimacy as a participant in the federal child nutrition program. In the trial brief just filed by the U.S. Attorney's Office, prosecutors say testimony in the upcoming trial will show Feeding Our Future Executive Director Amy Bock helped owners Salim Saeed and Abdul Qadir Nur Salah set up Safari Restaurant as a meal site that soon claimed to serve 5,000 meals a day, 7 days a week, collecting $16 million in federal child nutrition program funds in 2020 and 2021. When the Minnesota Department of Education told them restaurants could no longer serve as meal sites, the trial brief says the Safari owners, along with others charged in the case, opened up supposed sites across the state in cities like Wilmer, where they claim to provide food as a distributor. Other new court filings reveal prosecutors want to use evidence in the trial that Abdul Qadir Salah has gang affiliations, lied about his citizenship on immigration forms, and avoided paying taxes on the millions of alleged fraud proceeds. His attorney denies the gang allegation and says the rest is not relevant to the charges. According to the trial brief, Abdi Nur Salah, brother of Safari owner and aide to Mayor Jacob Frey, quote, used his political influence to lobby politicians to pressure MDE not to shut down Feeding Our Future and sites under its sponsorship so that he and his other co-conspirators could continue to carry out their fraudulent scheme. Frey fired Nur Salah after the allegations came out. His attorney did not comment. All along the way, federal prosecutors say Amy Bock found ways to keep the fraud scheme going. Prosecutors say evidence will show she received kickbacks from her co-defendants, including by claiming she sold the Safari owners a child care center.
The defendants are scheduled to be in court on Thursday for the final pretrial conference in this case. Then the trial is set to get underway on February 3rd.
Bock tried to calmly and methodically explain to jurors why the allegations against her are wrong. Going from sponsoring a few dozen meal sites to a few hundred, well, that was the need created by record high unemployment during the pandemic, she testified. The 21 meal sites along a short stretch of Lake Street, that's because 3 grocery stores were damaged in rioting, she explained, even circling those on a map. This large area became what's known as a food desert, she said. That created a need for additional sites that were located in that 1.8-mile section of Lake Street. Bock said she terminated food sites and vendors that she discovered submitted fraudulent claims, denied accusations from other witnesses it was because they had refused to pay her kickbacks, denied ever asking for or taking a bribe. Her attorney showed her an email of a fraudulent attendance roster, and did she personally review it, he asked. No, she said, it's just a form, and she contended that fraudulent claims emailed to Feeding Our Future that also copied her, then wrongfully implicate her in wire fraud. I'm confused, I'm upset, it's an email I received, she said. I didn't ask for it, I had no way not to receive it, and now I'm charged with a federal crime because somebody chose to email me something. But prosecutors contend that she committed wire fraud when she then emailed claims to the state that she knew to be fraudulent. She also testified that meal sites made large profits because the federal reimbursement rate is set. Actual meal costs could be very little, that sites and vendors were allowed to profit.
At the end of the day, Bock was also explaining some of the gifts she received from her boyfriend, some of the work that her boyfriend had done as a contractor in their offices. The prosecution had showed jurors that she gave his company money, which he then used to pay for these things, which they say was just money laundering, essentially, coming from fraudulent funds.
The federal trial of Amy Bock, the woman accused of being the ringleader of the Feeding Our Future fraud scandal, continues in Minneapolis today. More witnesses taking the stand, including an FBI agent. Fox 9's Rob Olson has been following this trial for us, and he spoke about what he didn't see on surveillance footage. Rob?
Yeah, this was very interesting and something that was not a part of the trial here last spring that I covered, the first Feeding Our Future trial, and that was FBI surveillance video that was used at 12 sites. Now, I asked why it wasn't involved last year. It was because the people in that trial were involved with other sites. They could only focus on certain ones, and so those weren't covered in the ones that were involved in the trial last year. But here, today, jurors saw side-by-side documents showing what was claimed and the video showing what the FBI saw.
In December of 2021, the FBI installed a surveillance camera overlooking this building just off Lake Street in Minneapolis. At the time, it was Safari Restaurant, which overall took in $12 million in federal child meal payments through Feeding Our Future. Safari's former co-owner, Salim Saeed, is on trial alongside Amy Bock, the Feeding Our Future executive director. Safari claimed to feed 4,000 to 6,000 kids a day. Its invoices and meal counts shown to the jury alongside the video. An FBI agent testifying that an average of 40 people came and went during the 6 weeks it was surveilled. The FBI set up a total of 12 cameras at sites claiming to serve extraordinary numbers of meals. Another was at a deli in St. Paul, also registered by defendant Salim Saeed, which claimed 1,800 meals per day. The video shown to the jury showed an average of 23 people a day coming and going. The jury was shown dozens of invoices, meal counts, and emails seized from Feeding Our Future's headquarters in St. Anthony. Some showed links to websites that randomly generated names and ages to create rosters of children who were served meals. Many were signed or sent by Amy Bock, who's charged with wire fraud, along with bribery for the alleged kickbacks that she received. Her defense attorney tried to raise doubt when it cross-examined the FBI agent, that they didn't see the back entrance where it's possible meals left packed in trucks for delivery. He pushed back, insisting they'd still see congestion. To that volume, he said, I would say it would not make any sense.
But Bock's defense attorney continues to try to cast some doubt here with the jury that Amy Bock didn't know what was going on. He contended in his opening statements that it was all these site operators that were lying to her by sending her these meal claims, and she didn't know anything about it. He also showed some of the emails to jurors that didn't include Amy Bock to try to suggest that she was out of the loop on some of these issues. This trial will continue tomorrow morning.
Ben Strayberg, seen here after his rather surprising testimony, was listed as the president of Feeding Our Future's board of directors. Yeah, big shoes, he joked when shown the nonprofit's org chart with his name at the top. He said he was never on its board, and I had no idea that I was any part of that. He said that he met Amy Bock, the Feeding Our Future founder, through mutual friends when he bartended in St. Paul. He was shown documents filled out when he allegedly joined her board, said he'd never seen them, that it was not his signature. One listed his qualifications in managing food service. He laughed and said, I serve drinks. Was shown board minutes with his name, and one noted that he'd made a motion to open more meal sites. He testified he was never at those meetings and in fact knew nothing about them. Bock is charged with wire fraud and bribery counts for her alleged role in the $250 million federal meal fraud. The prosecution says she orchestrated adding more than 200 meal sites, filed false claims of those sites, serving millions of meals, is accused of demanding kickbacks to stay involved. Also on the stand was a woman who testified that Amy Bock had recruited her to join the fraud and coached her to falsify claims. Lula Lee ran a restaurant in Faribault and pled guilty in 2023 for her role in the fraud, said she was recruited to become a meal provider in 2020, was pushed by Bock to fill out claims that she knew were impossible at a kitchen her size. Everything is a lie. They know that, she testified. She know, Amy. They taught me how to do this.
You know, that witness, Lula Ali, also got emotional on the stand several times, saying that she was sorry for her role in this. Now, again, she had a restaurant. Her husband had a meal site. Together, they both pled guilty a couple of years ago.
Julie, Amy Bock had an answer and an explanation for everything. The question is, though, whether the jury will believe those explanations or whether they will believe prosecutors' assertions that Bock participated in the millions of dollars of fraud that she now admits happened under her watch at Feeding Our Future. Under aggressive and fast-paced cross-examination by Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, Amy Bock acknowledged there was fraud occurring in the federal child nutrition program during the pandemic. To the tune of millions of dollars, Thompson asked. It appears that way, yes, Bock responded. Despite admitting the fraud was occurring, Bock, the former executive director of the nonprofit Feeding Our Future, which sponsored the meal sites, claimed she took no part in the fraud. When Thompson asked if it was suspicious that meal sites claimed to be serving thousands of kids the same number day after day, Bock answered, not necessarily. Concerning the 6,000 kids Bock's co-defendant Salim Saeed claimed to be serving at his restaurant Safari, Thompson asked, that's a pretty extraordinary number, would you agree? Now, yes. At the time, no, Bock answered. Bock claimed many sites were doing home deliveries, plus trucks were bringing meals from the sites to other locations. She said she trusted her staff, who said they inspected the sites and verified the numbers. Thompson pointed out that for every claim that a meal site made, Bock signed a certification that the number of meals claimed is accurate. And prosecutors allege she was motivated to approve inflated numbers because from the $240 million in reimbursement money the Department of Education released, Feeding Our Future got to keep 10% as administrative fees. Now, there was one exchange this afternoon that perfectly summed up the way this entire day of cross-examination went. Thompson was asking Bock about the sale of a daycare for $310,000 that prosecutors believe was actually a kickback. Even though Bock admitted that there was no daycare license, there were no children, there were no parents or clients, and she didn't even own the building, she would not admit that it was in fact a non-existent daycare. Julie?
So Lou, how would you describe her and her answering of the questions? Was it, she seemed confident? It's hard to believe with those numbers that she can maintain that she did nothing wrong.
She sounded very well prepared, Julie. I think she's been preparing for this for a number of years, in fact. But again, like some of these things, like claiming that there were trucks delivering meals to people, and that's why the numbers would make sense. Well, the jury didn't see any evidence of that happening during the trial. In fact, there was surveillance video that showed there were no people coming in and out, and there were no trucks coming or going.
And then just one last question, Lou. It's kind of hard to follow because while some people made millions of dollars, she did not appear to be one of those people that made millions off of this.
Yeah, she does not have the same financial motive that many of these other people have, but what prosecutors say is that she craved more than just the money. She craved being the boss. So there's lots of text messages about her bragging of being in charge of what was a multi-million-dollar, essentially, corporation, even though it was supposed to be a nonprofit.